last week we looked at the reality that we must guard ourselves against things that will entangle us or hinder us as we run after Jesus. We're in that race of life, the race that God has set before us, and we want to run after Him with all our might and not be entangled. And so today we're going to actually continue in that thought, and we'll pick up with what the author of Hebrews wrote, Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. The author of Hebrews wrote this. He said, "Therefore, since we also have such a large cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us lay aside every hindrance and the sin that so easily ensnares us. Let us run with endurance the race that lies before us, keeping our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. For the joy that lay before Him, He endured the cross, despising the shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God." Now, we want to follow these instructions. We want to lay aside every hindrance that might cause us to trip up in our attempt to run after Jesus. We don't want anything interfering with that pursuit. We want to keep our eyes on Him until we cross the finish line. You keep looking ahead, and we want to hear Him say the words, "Well done." However, we saw last week that binding ourselves to the world can cause us trouble. Now, that may be through marital relationships, if you marry the wrong person and give you trouble in life. Okay, we saw that. It could be through business relationships. The believer doesn't want to be bound to the non-believer. It could be through debt. That can create a hindrance that will interfere with your spiritual walk. But there are some other things that can also cause us to stumble in our attempt to follow Christ. And so we're going to actually look, in fact, there's no shortage of things, guys, in the world that can cause you to stumble in your attempt to follow Christ. The world will throw all kinds of obstacles at you. But we're going to look at today at a warning Jesus gave on the subject and how we can lay aside every hindrance as we run after Jesus. Now, so we're going to turn to Luke chapter 14, and this is actually a warning that Jesus Himself gave to those crowds that were following Him. We'll pick up in verse 25. "Now great crowds were traveling with Him, so He turned to them and said to them, 'If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. For which of you, wanting to build a tower, doesn't first sit down and calculate the cost to see if he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, after he has laid the foundation, he cannot finish it. And all the onlookers will begin to ridicule him, saying, "This man started to build and wasn't able to finish." Or what king, going to war against another king, will not first sit down and decide if he is able with 10,000 to oppose the one who is coming against him with 20,000? If not, while the other is still far off, he sends a delegation and asks for terms of peace. In the same way, therefore, every one of you who does not renounce all his possessions cannot be my disciple. Now, salt is good, but if salt should lose its taste, how will it be made salty? It isn't fit for the soil or for the manure pile. They throw it out. That anyone who has ears to hear, listen. Now, I think this is one of those very in-your-face Bible passages. I mean, Jesus says some hard things right here. Things that people find it hard to accept. Firstly, and we should understand, Jesus had thousands of followers. I mean, he had fed the multitude. Remember the feeding of the 5,000, all the people that are following him. And he actually stands up among all these crowds and he discourages them from following him. This is the opposite of what we do. We usually go the opposite direction. We try to remove every obstacle there can be and make it as easy as possible for people to follow Jesus. But Jesus warned people of the cost. He warned people of the cost, and he instructed people, count the cost before you start the race. Count the cost before you begin this journey. Know what you're getting into. See, following Jesus isn't something you can do half-heartedly. Either you're going to be all in, or the world will trip you up and you won't be in. There's no middle ground. If you want to run well the race, you've got to be all in. Jesus tells people to count the cost and determine if they're willing to pay the price. Don't follow him unless you're serious, because it will cost you everything. It will cost you everything. That's a lot. Everything. Now, of course, the alternatives aren't so good. What's the cost of not following Jesus? Everything. Okay. In fact, Jim Elliot said this, and I think it's a wise advice. He says, "He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose." Jesus is not telling these people, don't follow me. He's telling them, know what you're getting into. Count the cost, because it's going to be costly. Don't start on this and then turn back because you didn't know what you were getting into. Instead, evaluate honestly, is this really worth it? Because the truth is, it is worth it. But you need to know what you're getting into, or it will trip you up. But Jesus did tell them to count the cost. Understand what you're getting into before you start the race. And he compared it to a person who wanted to build a tower. Before starting, any project, wouldn't you sit down? You're going to do a home building project. Wouldn't you sit down and calculate the cost before you start? And wouldn't you want to know, what is this going to cost me before you go out and start doing it? I mean, none of us has ever started a home improvement project and then found out it costs more than we planned. Okay, you've never done that. I have to admit, I am like the king of half projects. I'm at Lowe's and I see someone say, "Oh, I ought to do this as a house," and I get it, and then years later, I'm still waiting to do. I got the parts. In fact, now sometimes it comes in handy because, believe it or not, I actually had a doorknob break. It just snapped right off. I mean, I don't know if you've ever had that happen. I had it happen, and I just happened to have one in stock, because I never changed the knob on the other door. So I had it with the matching key. It worked out perfect. It was just good. So, but that's not necessarily the recommended format. We really should plan, what is it going to cost me before I get started? Before I put on that new roof, before I put in new landscaping, before I do anything else, what will it cost me? That's a reasonable thing to do. Otherwise, you might get it half done and then have your neighbors laughing at you, or your wife nagging at you, but that's a different, story. Jesus pointed out the person who leaves those unfinished projects because they can't afford to finish it will get laughed at. Well, now, come on, you all giggled when I said, have you ever started a project or not, but do you laugh at people who do that? Don't we find it humorous when someone, maybe it's not humorous when it's in your house, but, the neighbor started this and he never finished. I mean, it can be something like that. Jesus also used the example of a king planning a war. What king would send his army out to war before he had examined the tactical situation to see if he could win the war, to see what the war would really cost him? Now, maybe the answer to that's Vladimir Putin, president of Russia. But, you should evaluate before you dive in, what's this really going to cost? That's wisdom. I think the point Jesus is making is, before you commit yourself to a major venture in life, you should determine what it's really going to cost, whether or not you're willing to pay that price. In fact, today I would say to people who want to get an education, are you really ready to make the sacrifice? Guys, it's not easy. It costs a lot of money to go to school. And it takes a lot of time to go to school. Now, it's worth it. I encourage education. I think education is wonderful. But understand, there's sacrifice. How many 18-year-olds sign up for college not understanding the sacrifice? Count the cost. Know what you're getting into. What will it cost you to follow Jesus? Everything. It will cost you everything. Jesus seems to list three specific things here in this passage that following him will cost you. In fact, he says, if you won't give up these three things, all three times, he says, you cannot be his disciple. Now, I don't know about you, but when an all-powerful, infinite God starts using the word can't, that's probably a good moment to pay attention. Okay? When God says something can't be done, that's serious. The first thing Jesus said you would have to be willing to give up is your family and your current life. Your family and your current life. Look again at verse 26 of Luke chapter 14. Jesus said, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Cannot. Strong words. Jesus is very adamantly strong on this point. We cannot cling to the life we have now and still follow him into the new life. You need to take this statement in the context of the chapter, and that is of counting the cost to follow Christ. See, if you decide to follow Jesus, your father and mother may not. If you decide to follow Jesus, your wife or husband may not. If you decide to follow Jesus, your children may not. They may not understand. Your relatives may not understand. Your friends may not understand. And they may choose to not follow Jesus with you. They may choose to even discourage you from following Jesus. Oh, why are you getting into that religious stuff? Are you willing to pay the price and follow Jesus anyway? Is your love for God to the point that you're willing to walk away from your family? Are you willing to follow Jesus without them? To leave them behind? Because understand, to follow Jesus into eternity is to leave everyone in the world behind. How does the old song go? I will follow. I've decided to follow Jesus, though none go with me. Still I will follow. Be willing to go with no one else. Now understand, your family may not be willing to follow Jesus, and even if they are, see, I'll tell you what a lot of us might experience here, because we're in the good United States of America. It's a Christian society. You may find that many of them are saying, well, yeah, I'm a Christian. I'm okay with this God stuff and this Jesus stuff and this Bible stuff, as long as it doesn't affect my life. Heard about one guy complaining in church, the preacher, he said, now that preacher, he not only wants us to be religious on Sunday, he wants us to be religious the rest of the week too. But see, you might run into that in your family and you have a zeal to follow Jesus and you want to follow him wholeheartedly, and your family can become a hindrance in that walk with Christ. See, last week we looked at some concept of this in wisely choosing who you marry, because I'm going to tell you, who you marry will affect your life, big time. But you don't get to choose your parents. Okay? You don't get to choose your kids, unless you adopt, but you don't get to choose your kids. They come, they're yours. And if they are opposed to God's work in your life, understand they can become a hindrance to your spiritual walk. Now, this goes against our natural tendencies because we want to put family first. In fact, the world will tell you, family first. It's kind of a mantra. I even hear it among church people. But Jesus says if you put family first, you cannot follow him. Use that word cannot. Because they will get in the way. Are you following Jesus? Are you willing to follow Jesus even if it will cost you your life? Now, I'm not just talking about dying for Jesus. We'll look at that in a minute. But what about if it cost you your livelihood? What if it cost you your profession? What if following Jesus cost you your career? What if following Jesus cost you your home? Your HOA doesn't allow your Christian behavior. What if it cost you your educational status? What price are you willing to pay? How many Christians have chosen their career over Christ? I'll follow Jesus after I retire. Now, I haven't hit retirement yet, but at the age I'm at right now, I can tell you, the older you get, the harder it is because you got no energy. Okay? I mean, it just goes that way. But it actually seems to be our natural tendency to make our career, our livelihood, the stuff that gives us our self-identity, top priority in our lives. We make that important to us. And this is the opposite of what God wants for you. Your identity is not to be in the work that you do for the world. Your identity is to be in Jesus. You are to be clothed in Jesus, conformed to the image of Christ, wrapped in His righteousness. Your identity for eternity is not based on the work you do. It's based on what Jesus has done for you, making you God's child. Your life's not to be about the work you do for the world, but about your walk with Christ. Are you willing to give up your family and your life as you know it to follow Jesus? Jesus said to count the cost, and if you are ready to abandon these things for Him, then that's good. But if you're not, you cannot be His disciple. Now, that's pretty strong. I mean, is that fair? I mean, I consider that a strong statement that He's making. But the next statement is even harsher. Look at verse 27 of Luke chapter 14. He says this, "Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple." Now, we tend to think of the cross as a religious symbol, something you wear on jewelry, an emblem on your clothing, a bumper sticker on your car. We decorated our churches with it. I mean, we have a nice cross up here. We decorate our homes with them. But Jesus is talking to a very different people. To them, the cross is not a decoration. It is not a religious symbol. It is an instrument of death. He lived in the Roman world. Crosses are what they used to execute people. It's a method of execution. When you picked up your cross, and it was your cross, and you were going to carry it somewhere, it's because you were on your way to die. You were on your way to be executed. Your life was ending. For us, it'd be like saying, get your coffin, we're heading to the cemetery. Might as well bring a shovel with you because it's time to dig the hole. Or maybe here out west we might say, bring your own rope because we're heading to the tree. Okay, that's about the equivalent of what Jesus is saying. To follow Jesus is to lay down your life. When Jesus calls people to be His disciples, He calls them to come and die. You are dying to yourself. It is the opposite of our natural tendencies. We have a natural tendency to cling to our life, that survival instinct. But Jesus calls us to go against our natural desires. In fact, Luke 17:33, He says this. He says, if you cling to your life, you will lose it. But if you let it go, you will save it. To follow Jesus, we have to go against our natural tendencies, to lay down our very life, pick up the instrument of death, the very thing that kills us, and follows Him. And in so doing, we save our life. We receive eternal life. We receive all that He has to give. But have you made that commitment? I'm following Jesus. I'm picking up my cross. I'm laying down my life, and I'm following Him. And that's not, did you come to Jesus and get fire insurance? See, I think we and I'm going to be critical of church evangelism just for one moment. I think we often package it this way. You come down this aisle, you say these magic words, you have your fire insurance, you will go to heaven. That is not biblical Christianity. Biblical Christianity is you come and you place your faith in Christ, and it transforms who you are. Because God comes into your life and He changes you. He changes you. Have you come to Him to pick up your cross, to follow Him, to receive His new life, which means giving up your old one, dying to yourself, dying to all that the world has to offer so you can receive what God has to offer. See, Jesus warns us to count the cost, to make sure we're really willing to pay the price before we start out on this journey with Him. And understand that clinging to your life, clinging to the world, rather than embracing what God has for you, will become a hindrance in your spiritual walk. If you try and have a foot in each camp, it will become a hindrance to your spiritual walk. It will trip you up as you run the race after Jesus. Jesus did give one more thing that could hinder us in this passage, and we have to give up in order to follow Him. This is Luke 14, verse 33. I know it's everyone's favorite memory verse. Jesus said this. He said, "In the same way, therefore, every one of you who does not renounce all his possessions cannot be my disciple." Everyone who does not renounce all his possessions cannot be my disciple. Jesus said that for us to be His disciple, we must renounce all our possessions. Now, there is kind of an interesting thing about the Greek word here. Panta, I think, is the Greek word for all. What it means is all. Okay, just throwing that out there for you. To follow Jesus, I have to recognize I own nothing. I own nothing. Everything we have, everything we are, everything we ever will be, become His when I follow Jesus. Or I cannot, where Jesus uses, cannot be His disciple. We must recognize that we are just stewards. We're managers of the things that God temporarily puts in our lives. We have no ownership because everything belongs to God. Now, it shouldn't take long for us to figure out this is reality. You come into this world with nothing and you ain't getting to take it with you. I mean, it's temporary. You don't own it. God owns it. He made the universe. It's all His. But I think this is a difficult concept for most Americans. In fact, I suspect that for many, it's harder for us than the other two we just looked at. You know, we'll die for Jesus, but we're not giving up our stuff for Him. See, I'd suggest that in our culture, this is actually one of the biggest obstacles to a life of faith, and that's our possessions. If you don't have anything, it's easy to give up nothing for Jesus. But when you got a lot of stuff, remember the rich young ruler, it's hard to give it up when you got a lot. We tend to cling to the passing stuff of this world, and it does hinder the race we're running, the race God has set before us. Now think about this. I mean, maybe you've seen guys, I try to think, for men and for women, what do they like? Some guys are really in love with their cars. Okay, you ever see that? Some men will spend more time and money on their car than they do their wife. Okay? And that gets them into trouble. I'm just going to tell you, that'll get you into trouble. And your car will get you where you need to go even if it wasn't washed this week. Okay? I know that's a shocking thought to some, and some of you are laughing at me because my car doesn't get washed much. I did take my car and actually have it professionally washed before Johnny was born. Yeah, he did turn 6 this year. And so, I don't spend a lot of time and money on my car, but I do keep it tuned. I mean, it's reliable transportation because I keep it in order to keep it reliable. But some guys are there. I mean, they love that. That's their possession. That's their thing. Some women, they love their clothes and their accessories so much that they need a room just for their shoes. I think some women spend more time picking out their shoes than they do their husband. I mean, it's just, is Imelda Marcos in the house? I mean, some of you might be too young for that reference. But here's the problem with possessions. Whatever the possession is, here's the problem with possessions. At some point, you have to ask the question, do you own your possessions or do your possessions own you? Which is it? Do you own your possessions or do your possessions own you? I have a dog. I own a dog named Mocha, but I want to tell you, he thinks he owns a person named David. Okay. Which way does that go? Are you spending your time, your money, your life saving for the betterment, slaving for the betterment of your possessions. You own them, or do they own you? Do you spend more time on housing your possessions than you do on housing yourself? Some people do. They actually spend more money on their stuff than they do their own selves, their own family. Is your life so clogged with stuff that it makes you so you can't do the things you want to do, like follow Jesus? Do your possessions own you, or do you own them? Now, in the movie Lord of the Rings, I'm assuming y'all Lord of the Rings fans. You kind of, okay, and everybody's shaking their hands now. Tolkien actually, believe it or not, Tolkien actually has a fair amount of Christian imagery in it, but you don't pick it up unless you read the Silmarillion, which is the book that kind of explains the background of all of it. But in Lord of the Rings, everyone wants to own a ring. The one ring, it's the ring of power. Everybody wants to own it, but no one can control it. It has the power that the longer you possess it, and your possession, the more it takes control of you. And I actually brought a replica. I have a game called, y'all played Risk before? Anybody ever seen? Okay, I have the Lord of the Rings edition. It's a map of Middle Earth, and your armies are either the good guys or the bad guys. It comes with a ring, and the ring moves along the board until it gets to Mount Doom, and if it gets there, the game's over. And so Johnny really likes the ring. He doesn't play Risk yet, but he likes the ring. And I've taught him to hold it in his hand and say, "My precious." It's fun with a 6-year-old. So it's fun. We have fun. But in the movie, what happens is Frodo, the kind of the hero of the movie, he's on a mission to destroy the ring. And even him and the good guy, the longer he carries it, the harder it becomes for him to let go. It's his possession. But by the end, it's taking possession of him. Possessions do that. Things you own, things you think you own, will take control of you. It's how they work. The more valuable something becomes to us, the less we own it, and the more it owns us. Our possessions often take control of our life. Now, I remember I like classic stuff like Lord of the Rings and I Love Lucy. And so I was watching I Love Lucy, and there's an episode, it's in the 3rd season, by the way. There's an episode of I Love Lucy where Lucy and Ethel are trying to win a contest in the newspaper. It's called, I forget what it's called, something about if your serial number matches, it's bonus bucks. If your serial number on the dollar matches, you can find the matching number, you can win a prize. Okay, and they're trying to find it. And so they finally come up with $1 that match, and had been going back and forth between them. She paid Ethel something, then she bought the groceries, and the groceries came back and changed. And so they're arguing over who really owns it. And Lucy grabs it, and she's holding the dollar, and she yells, "Possession's 9/10 of the law, and I'm possessed." Now, you have to, Lucy is Lucy. But see, that's how clean possessions works. You think you're clinging to it, you think you own it, but in the end, it winds up owning you. And of course, you can imagine the story. Everything goes wrong in their episode. The solution is to renounce those possessions, to renounce ownership, to surrender them to Jesus. And that may mean, in some cases, getting rid of them altogether. Guys, some things have such a grip on us. The only way to get free is to get them out of your life. That can happen. Now, I'm by nature a gamer. I don't know if any of you are gamers at all, like to play games. When I was young, I would spend countless hours playing games. That was something I would do. My preference was really strategy war games. I prefer historical or sci-fi. I do like video games. Unfortunately, I don't have a working game system at the moment. Johnny kept shoving things into the Nintendo, so it doesn't work anymore. But I did, as a younger person, I had several large board games with different historical scenarios. And if you're not into serious gaming, think of Risk. You all played Risk. Okay, think of Risk on steroids. Okay, I mean we had games that would literally take up the entire dining room table, and could go for days. My mother hated that. We'd have to find other tables and set them up in the living room. I mean, we'd have things. But if you're into that, tabletop games, large board games, you know they can take up a lot of room. You have to store all the game pieces. You have to store the boards, and they can take up, your dining room for several days or your living room for several days at a time. And also, they can cost a lot of money, especially if you get into a game where you have to buy extra parts. I mean, some of them you can just keep adding more parts to your game, more to build your army. All those tanks cost money. And so you can do it. It can add up into a lot of money. And as I was preparing for ministry, I increasingly felt convicted about my ownership of these games. Not that there's anything wrong with playing games. I don't mind a good game. It's cool. But I didn't have space in my life. I didn't have space in my closet. I didn't have time to play them. I didn't have money to commit to them. And these games required all of these things. They would consume it. And so the question came, would I cling to my possessions, the ones that were at my point in life, the ones were my most cherished possessions, or was I willing to give them up to follow Jesus? Our natural tendency is to cling to our stuff, especially the stuff we value most. The things that we worked hard to get, the things we want to spend our time on, the things that we have invested in. There's a natural tendency for those things to become our master. They wind up controlling your time. They wind up controlling your energy, controlling your finances, controlling and taking up space in your lives. Now, in my case, I did actually give my games away. I gave them to a friend, and he was happy to get them, but also sad because he knew it meant I wasn't going to be playing with him. And it was a hard thing to do, but I needed to do it. I needed to get them out of my life. I needed those possessions to stop taking up place in my life so I could follow Jesus. And I do have a couple games now at home. I don't have too many, but a couple I have were given to me as an adult, just kind of gifts that were given to me. Really, most of my gaming today consists of Hungry Hippos and Monopoly Junior. That's what I've been playing lately. And those are kind of quick-paced games, and so that works out okay. But the question is, will you renounce everything you own to follow Jesus? Will you give it up? Will you give up the things that are most important to you? The things that you cherish? Maybe things that were given to you as a gift. Things that you value. See, Jesus said, unless we will do that, we cannot be His disciple. Those possessions will stand in your way. They will trip you up. So how do we lay aside every hindrance that might trip us in our race to follow Jesus? How do we make sure that we are following these very difficult requirements? Guys, this is not easy stuff. It goes against the grain. It goes against our nature. How do we make sure we're following these requirements that Jesus gave? I'm going to suggest to you this morning the answer for how to do this, how to lay aside every hindrance, is you make God first in all things. Make God first in all things. God will not and should not ever be second in your life. Make God first. He must always be first. In fact, this is the first of the 10 Commandments. Exodus chapter 20, verse 3, God said, do not have other gods besides me. Who's first? God. He gets that first spot. He is at the top. Don't put anything ahead of God. If you do, putting anything ahead of God, putting anything equal to God, is idolatry. And it's a trap that will ensnare us, that will trip us up on our race to follow Christ. This is why we as Christians are warned about running away from idolatry when we're running after Jesus. In fact, this is 1 Corinthians 10, 13, and 14. I included 13 because I wanted you to get the context. Paul writes this, he says, no temptation has come upon you except what is common to humanity. But God is faithful. He will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able. But with the temptation, He will also provide the way out so that you may be able to bear it. So then, my dear friends, flee from idolatry. See, God will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you're able. He will always provide a way out. So make sure you have no idols in your life. Make sure God's first. If you want to avoid temptation, you should flee idolatry or flee anything being equal to God, anything being ahead of God. See, understand, it's not family first, it's God first. God first. It's not your livelihood and your career first. It's God first. It's not your possessions first. All the things that you have worked so hard to own. That's not first. It's God first. It's not your own survival first. It's God first. Even ahead of our own survival. That's why we pick up our cross and follow Him. Jesus said, if you won't put God first above all these other things that are so natural to us, we cannot be His disciple. And I think the reason for that is in all of those things, even though all of them are good things, guys, your family's not a bad thing. I mean, well, it might depend on your relatives, but I mean, your family's not a bad thing. God gives us a family. That's a blessing. It's not wrong to have a career and to work and to have a livelihood. God gives us talents and abilities to use. It's not even wrong to have possessions so long as you have them and they don't have you. Understand? God's the owner. You're the manager. You're the steward. They don't own you. You own, He owns them. It's not wrong to have a life here on earth. God gave you life so you could live it for Jesus. So you could inherit eternal life. So you can receive God's gifts. God gave you life. It's good things. But those good things, if put in the wrong place and the wrong priority in your life, they can and will hinder your walk with Christ. Good things can become bad things if you put them ahead of the best things. These are the things that can trip us up on our race following Jesus. If you want to win the race, if you want to live like no one else, then put God first in your life. Put Him first. And I'm going to tell you that will cause so many hindrances to be set aside. So many things that would trip you up will be removed from your life if you simply put God first.